Tom King's Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is the basis for one of the next DCU movies, and has received ample praise. So why was it such a chore to read? Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Tom King and illustrated by Bilquis Evely, the first issue of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow was published by DC Comics in August of 2021, with the 8th and final issue being released in April of the next year. And Kara Zor-El is a long way from home. With Krypto attacked and a young girl roping her into a revenge mission, she will cross the galaxy to bring an end to Krem of the Yellow Hills. But what happens when her very purpose is brought into question? And how will she handle the burden of someone else's hatred when the lessons from her cousin ring hollow? We're jumping into the art section now, and regardless of what I might say about the story of this book, I really like the style. I didn't love it to the point where I want to cover my entire body with the artwork of Bilquis Evely, which seems to be the general reaction to it, but it's really clean, somewhat refreshing, and got quite a wholesome feel to it. Especially how this wanted to give a different perspective to Kara, and it being off-world, I feel like it really suited what Tom King wanted to do with this book. The main thing I really enjoyed about it was the sketchy quality, and I don't mean that to make it sound dodgy, but it looks like there's still that draft element to it, and you can almost feel part of the process that went into creating the page. It also manages to blend a roughness with this Disney-like quality that can be seen on some pages, and I'm not fully sure how it manages to pull that off, but it does. As well, with this being a book that travels the galaxy, I loved the variety of landscapes, and it just mixed it up so much that there was always something different to look at. And yeah, it's probably more to do with the colouring, which did also really help to give this a subtle look, but it knew the best combinations to make each planet feel alien and different from one another. But at the same time, it manages to capture a vibe, whether that be warmth, danger, or something somewhere in the middle. Especially when it comes to the action, I loved how Evely incorporated movement lines to disguise some of the finer detail and allowed the mind to imagine what might be happening. Those techniques also really help with the comedic timing, and it was done so in a more subtle way, like a character would just move their eyes. And yeah, I know it's hypocritical to bring this up because so many different artists do it, but you could tell when Evely had just copied a panel from earlier on in the page. Yeah, it is one of those known things in the industry to the point where other books have openly mocked it, but if it's to the point where I can notice that the majority of a panel is being traced and it's still only the first issue, that's really not a good look. As well, yeah, there was a lot that I liked about this style, but there were some pages where it felt like it was just missing that extra something. But for me, the expressions could be lacking, and they were often left looking like me if you give me a word that's longer than 5 letters long to read, or a character could be having a big emotional moment, but they're left with a face that looks like the one that Michael Cera's perfected. Maybe it was something to do with the eyes, because I noticed on a few occasions that they wouldn't fit the face right, or the disparity between them would be a bit too jarring. Don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as bad as it was in Identity Crisis, but it's one of those times where the sketchy quality to the art was more of a detriment than a point of praise. So I do think this is a very particular style that not everybody can get behind. I myself loved a lot of the pages and the layouts, and I found myself going back and just looking at them in preparation for this review, but there are also some qualities that really rub me the wrong way. I think I would recommend to everybody to just flick through this and see if it's a style that you can get behind, because it isn't like one that you'd mainly see from the big 2 publishers, and that might be a massive advantage for you. You might want something different, and there were a lot of pages that I'd love to see in a bigger format, which is why it's great that the deluxe edition's coming out later this year. And if you wanted to pick that up and support the channel at the same time, you can get it for a little bit less with the discount codes that we've got from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. We're jumping into the story section now, and before reading this, I heard a lot of hype about this title, even from the usual Tom King detractors, and I really wanted to love this book, but I just didn't get the same experience that everybody else seemed to. I'm going to try and break it down, and I want to start with the positives, even though some people in the comments section won't listen to them at all and just pretty much complain that I didn't love this unanimously. But for a fresh start to Supergirl, this does a decent enough job. Yeah, no, great praise. Why don't you just slap that on the front cover? And in terms of the actual plot points of the story and where the characters move to, it is done quite well, and it doesn't feel like anything's ever too rushed, or that there wasn't enough time in between for the characters to get to know each other. As well, but after I think the first 5 pages, this had a great first issue. Once Krem was introduced, it felt like there was a decent enough antagonist for Supergirl to go up against, and her introduction in the tavern was done really well, and I really enjoyed that because it felt like the big moment she deserved to have in her own book. And just to jump back to Krem before I get too distracted, I'm really glad that he was the focus for the entire series. With them travelling across the galaxy, I expected him to be one of those villains that wouldn't make it past the halfway mark, and there'd be some big planet-destroying villain that would be thrown in at the last minute for Supergirl to go up against. But they kept this a very personal tale, and I think it was a great move on King's part to involve Krypto in Kara's motivation. I'm an animal lover in case the name of this channel wasn't already a giveaway, so to have Krypto be the target of Krem so early on just meant that there was zero chance that he was going to eventually become a lovable villain. And I got kind of excited because I thought it meant we were going to get Supergirl John Wick. As well, because it was so easy to rally against him, it meant that there was a greater weight added to the moral dilemma that was at the centre of this story. Ruth knowing that Krem is the one that she needs to get revenge on, but struggling with the idea of taking someone's life and enlisting Kara to help her do that is all the more complicated because it's against somebody that's got no redeeming qualities. And it very quickly cuts to the core of who these very characters are and why they feel the need to hold such a moral. Because let's be honest, if these were characters that have killed before, Krem is not the type of person that you're going to change your ways for. And although you will never see me wearing Ruth merchandise, even if it was a choice between doing that or standing naked outside the Fortress of Solitude, I did still like her connection with Kara and how that built in such a genuine and wholesome way. There was this big sister little sister vibe that initially started out with contempt from Kara's side, but even over the course of these 8 issues, it felt natural how they slowly started to become friends, and you could see that Kara appreciated a companionship and also allowed her to reflect on who she is and some of the values that her family holds. But seeing their connection build and contribute towards such a sweet ending was one of the main things that kept me invested in this book. And it didn't really click for me until I was partway through King's Batman run, but his books are never really about the title character, and if anything they can sometimes fall into the supporting role. Vision, which was a book that I loved, had as much focus on the family as it did about the main character. Batman, at least for the first part, is more about his relationship with Catwoman and what that means to his life, and Supergirl is more about her companionship with Ruth. I also appreciated how committed it was to giving us a sci-fi fantasy narrative and was so unapologetic towards that. It didn't panic halfway through and feel the need to throw in a load of big names from the DC universe, or bring it back to Earth so that you knew where this fit within a bigger narrative. And although I have my issues with this version of Kara, taking her out of the shadow of Superman and not constantly referencing the fact that she's his cousin made it so much more of a character exploration. And also, this might just be me being nice and playing devil's advocate, but I could see the disparities in her characterization maybe being because she's in a different location, because sometimes that changes what you want, and that's the same in real life. Because for example, if you're in the EU and you want your books with free shipping and free gifts with every order, then the only place that you should go is Comics Bugle. They've been a massive support to this channel, and they can be to you as well, because if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get 3% off all items that aren't already in a sale. So get your orders in. Now, before I jump into my problems with this book, I just want to take a moment for all those people that can't seem to realise that all reviews are just personal opinions. Even your own, they're not facts. So if you are one of those people that's been banging on about how this is one of the greatest books of the last decade and never really explaining why, then you should probably turn this video off now. But I just can't do that. I feel if I'm not honest, it'd be wasting everyone's time, because this book was an absolute slog. I read the first 36 issues of Zdarsky's Daredevil quicker than I did the 8 issues of this book. And sure, the first issue did pick up in the second half once Kara was introduced, and it did show some promise, but even the opening couple of pages of this had me taking a break after them because it just really didn't grab me. And even going back to it after the fact, a lot of the plot points shown here are interesting. It's a young girl who sees her father killed, she mourns over the body and swears to herself that she's going to get revenge, and embarks on a journey into a daunting world that she knows that she isn't fully prepared for. But somehow the sheer amount of narration from Ruth was enough to make me check out of this because it made the pacing awful. And honestly, I get when people complain when I do it now, because she never shuts up. Worst bit is, I gave it the benefit of the doubt in the first issue. I thought to myself that maybe this was just King's way of introducing this story, and she will just eventually shut the fuck up once Kara's in the picture, but yeah. No. Every big moment from this book, every fun scene that we could have had is polluted with at least a few yellow narration boxes that by comparison makes it feel like Deadpool's actually quite tight-lipped. Did King have this fear that people would leave the book if Ruth didn't narrate for 2 pages? Or was he paid per word on this book? That's probably why issues 4 and 8 are the only ones that I really remember fondly, and I'd gladly revisit because they were the only ones that really let the story speak for itself. The action was allowed to happen without distraction, and the emotional moments were given the silence that they needed so that the nuances of the art could do the heavy lifting. Because it got to a point where I wondered why Tom King even bothered having an artist on this book. At first I tried to gauge if this was some kind of homage to earlier comics because I know that they were very narration heavy, but by the 3rd issue I just didn't care what the intention was because the execution was so poor that it made me not even care about the action that was happening. And I haven't got a problem with narration itself, but it should at least add something to the scene that I'm looking at. And it's funny because I left a note whilst I was reading this that says, emphasize how mundane and useless the information provided in one of the narration boxes is. But it's so mundane and useless that I can't remember any specific passage from it. And it's ironic too because I am reading King's Batman at the moment, and the criticisms that I've heard for that series can all be applied to this one instead. With Supergirl, it felt like there was no one guiding King on how to deliver the best story, and when to rein in his hubris towards his linguistic skills and his intertextuality, because in all honesty, if the narration wasn't in this book, I think that would only be a positive. He spends too long creating new characters and not enough of the focus is on the interesting ones that we already know, and he completely changes the personality of the established characters so that it can fit the story that he wanted to tell. And just to touch back on that second point, can anybody tell me an interesting thing about Ruth besides the fact that she watched her dad die? But when you force Supergirl to be a side character in her own book, it best be for somebody that's more interesting than the paper that it was printed on. Actually, that last line wasn't really relevant. I read this on DC Universe Infinite, and who knows, maybe it was a tactical move to not always have the focus on Supergirl, because there was a lot of scenes where it didn't even feel like it was Kara in the costume. I couldn't always put my finger on what it was that felt off about her in certain scenes, but it was as if King originally wanted to do a Wolverine story, or Wolverine if Hot Toys is anything to go by, or any of the other plethora of gruff, hungover, foul-mouthed, reluctant protector types that are enlisted on an epic journey with a childlike figure who slowly warms up to them and begins to see them like family. But then King found out he had to do a Supergirl book and kept the same plot but just changed the name. I'm not sure if it's explained either, but throughout the entire series she felt quite underpowered in this. There is a fight in I think issue 4 where she did just dominate, but pretty much everywhere else she just didn't really have that formidable presence unless it was against a much weaker character. It never felt like she was the alpha in the room, and I think the perfect example of that was just how easy Krem got the better of it. I'm baffled at how he managed to get the best of it and steal a ship in such a short amount of time, and that was in the first issue. In any regular scenario, somebody like Krem would never be able to get the better of Supergirl. And yeah, Kara can have an attitude and be a bit feisty, but this very rarely felt like the character that I know, and not in like a cool reinvention way, but as if it wasn't supposed to be her in the first place. But I will admit, despite my problems with the journey, I did really like the final issue with this. All of the build up with the Krem stuff and Kara debating on her morality came to a head here, and the very final scene had such a rewarding feel to it. And I'm only talking vaguely about it, so don't worry, nothing's going to be ruined for you. But if nothing else, the ending did at least feel like a worthy payoff, and that I hadn't wasted my time with this series. So yeah, this book was certainly an experience, but I think it just ties into this weird phenomenon that Tom King's stories seem to exemplify. His books either seem to get labelled as the best or the worst, and there just never seems to be room for a middle ground. Vision was just the best. Heroes in Crisis is just the worst. Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is just the best. His Batman run, well, the community seems kind of divided on that one, but again, people are either it's just the best or it's just the worst. But what I'm getting at is that the truth can be somewhere in the middle. There were still elements that I really enjoyed, so despite my criticisms, I can see this being a great book to people who maybe don't know a lot about Supergirl. I'm uncertain if the character will be the exact same in the DCU movie, but I can see why Gunn chose this to be a framework. And unless he got Ruth doing commentary over the movie, I think it could work well. And who knows, maybe if I went back and ignored the majority of the narration, I might have enjoyed this as much as the majority did, and trust me, I wish that would have been the case from the beginning. This is my final verdict. And I feel like this series is the equivalent to that meme where two men are sitting on the same bus, where one chooses to look at beautiful scenery and the other sees nothing but doom and gloom. Because Tom King's Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow does a lot of things right, but the things that didn't land were impossible for me to not notice. I wanted to love this book, especially because it's a catalyst for one of the upcoming DC movies, and it has a unique style and it takes Kara out of a usual environment to craft a story that's about morality and companionship without needing to involve the wider DC universe. But at the same time, it has an annoying narrator that never stops talking, who's pretty much the secret main character, who has no personality or interesting qualities beyond the revenge mission that she ropes Kara into. Additionally, there were many moments where it felt like I was looking at a different character that just happened to be wearing a Supergirl costume. And the massive hype that this got probably did more to harm this book for me than it did to help me enjoy it. The Evely art, although phenomenal when it did get a chance to shine, isn't enough to blind me to how much of a challenge it was to get through each issue without needing a break, even if the final issue did go some way in redeeming the journey that had come before it. I know some people think that this book is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and if you're one of those people, I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise, but I also think it'd be a hard task to recommend this to everyone, so it depends what jumps out of this book most for you that will dictate the experience that you get. But if I had to sum up Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow in one sentence, it wasn't for me, despite having a unique style and trying to be a good reintroduction to this character, but the majority of people seem to love this, so what do I know? But whether you love it or hate it, that's my review, and until next time, just make sure that you stay safe, and stay mad all you dogs. We're both. See you in the next video.